So I want to just talk about the following question. Should we think that there are some truth or facts that we human beings are in principle incapable of capturing in thought or language? So are there some truth that we just cannot represent in thought or language? So let me just illustrate what the question is about. So you think of, here's the world, and the world contains all kinds of facts that obtain. And there are many truths about the world. There's more than 2 people in this room, Chapel is in North Carolina, and so on and so forth. The world could be seen as just all those facts taken together. And here is us with our minds and our language, and we represent certain facts in thought and language. So the sentence, Chapel is in North Carolina, represents one of those particular facts. And this is a representation that we have access to. We can think the thought that Chapel is in North Carolina. Our minds are capable of doing that. But the question is, can we capture every fact or every truth that obtains in this particular way? Is our mind good enough to think everything there is to think about the world? And is our language is good enough, in principle, to capture every truth and every fact? Any fact that is left out, that we in principle are incapable of representing in thought or language, we can call an ineffable fact. A fact that we cannot simply in principle capture in thought or language. And the question is...
Do you also consider Republicans?
The question is... no interruptions from the floor. What? Wait. I should use this. So the question is, are there any such facts? Do we have reason to think that there are some? So the first thing to notice is that we could not give an example of any such fact. It would be in principle impossible to say that, well, the fact that such and such is one that we cannot capture in thought or language. But that doesn't answer the question, so you might still have good reason to believe that there are such facts, even though you cannot give an example. Similarly, you might have good reason to believe that you have mice in your house, even though you can't point to any single particular mouse that's in your house. And so the argument, the question is, are there any good arguments for it? So let's consider one. The argument is simply the following. Even though we can't give an example of any fact that is beyond what we can represent, we can give an example of a fact that's ineffable for us. We can give examples of facts that are ineffable for other simpler creatures. So just take very simple ones like a honeybee. And a honeybee can represent certain things about the world. It can represent where the nectar is relative to its hive, some simple things. Right? But so we can look down at the honeybee and say, oh, you simple honeybee, obviously you're the kind of creature for which the fact, let's say, that the European economy is heading towards a recession is in principle beyond you. You cannot in principle think that thought or represent that fact in whatever representational system you have available. And then same for other kind of creatures. So cats and dogs, you might think, are doing a little bit better than honeybees, but still we can point to lots of examples of facts or truth that are in principle beyond the mind of a cat or a dog. But why should we think that we are at the top of the scale of what can be represented? The honeybee might be at the bottom, cats and dogs are a little higher, we're higher still. But couldn't we imagine that there are other creatures that look down at us just like we look down at the honeybee? Some super advanced aliens, or Laurie's vampires, or some other creatures that are just incredibly sophisticated compared to us. And they look at us and say, oh, you humans, of course you can represent that the European economy is heading towards a recession, but your minds are so simple and feeble you couldn't begin to think the thought that blah, 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 blah. And obviously, we couldn't imagine or conceive what this would be like. So, to get clear about this, let's distinguish ineffable facts from facts that are unknowable, that are beyond us in a different way, and that are incomprehensible, also that are beyond us in a different way. An ineffable fact is one that we can't represent. An unknowable fact doesn't have to be ineffable. So there are facts that are unknowable even though they are effable. So take an example. How many dinosaurs have ever lived before they became extinct? It's a particular number. However you make that more precise, it's just a particular number. So that number is either odd or even. So here's one fact, or alleged fact. The number of dinosaurs that ever lived is odd. Here's another one. The number of dinosaurs that ever lived is even. One of them is a fact that obtains. But we will never be able to find out which one it was. It's just the information is lost. It's beyond what we can still find out. So these are facts that are unknowable, that are beyond us in a certain way, but are still not ineffable. We can still represent these facts. Any ineffable fact, however, will also be unknowable for us. And if there are any, then there would be facts that are in principle unknowable for us because we can't even represent them. We can't even entertain these thoughts. Similarly, there are facts that might be incomprehensible, ones that we will never understand, for example, but we can still represent them. So, for example, there is something rather than nothing, or the universe exists, or things like that. Now, of course, all these are controversial examples, but you might well think that human beings will never be able to understand why that's the case. But that's a fact that we can represent. It's not an ineffable fact. On the other hand, any ineffable fact will be incomprehensible, because we cannot even think that thought, and we cannot therefore understand why that fact obtains. So, the ineffable are things that would be really beyond us in a certain extreme way, that are not just unknowable and incomprehensible, but we can't even entertain them. And it looks like that we have some good reason to believe that there are such facts. And why think that just our minds, on the scale of what can be represented, have now reached the pinnacle, and we've gotten everything? Dogs got closer, other creatures got closer, but we made it all the way to the top. You might think that. Why not? Couldn't it not be the aliens looking down at us in the same way? So, you might think that this would have significant consequences. If we have good reason to think that certain facts are in principle beyond us, then maybe, a lot of things that we're trying to do are just overly ambitious, that we couldn't aim to understand like what reality is like or things like that. But this will be premature, because even though we have good reason to think that there are ineffable facts, like the argument just given, there's a puzzle about them. And the solution to this puzzle will be crucial for understanding what the significance is of these facts. And the puzzle is simply, where are they? The fact just is that even though a fact is ineffable, doesn't mean we should never encounter it. Sure, we can't represent that fact, but you might well think that you might encounter certain things that you recognize are just some things that you cannot represent in thought or language. You might well, look at something over there and say, oh my God, I cannot possibly even begin to describe what's going on there. It is so different that my thought and language give out, and it's just beyond what a creature like me can possibly think. But that doesn't seem to happen, right? I mean, it seems like the world looks to us like any fact. We can represent everything. Our powers of representation are unlimited. But this is a puzzle about why does it not happen, for example, that when you ask a certain scientific question, are you reaching for the timer? No, okay. When you ask for a certain scientific question that, you realize, oh my God, yeah, this question, it's a great question. I couldn't possibly begin, my mind is just so feeble, I couldn't. That doesn't seem to happen either. It seems to us that we can do everything there is to do. And this needs to be explained. On the one hand, we have good reason to think that our minds are just on a scale of what can be represented. On the other hand, the ineffable seems to be completely irrelevant, even if it's there. So what would explain it? So I want to propose an hypothesis that would explain this. I'll call it the subalgebra hypothesis. And I want to illustrate it just with an example of numbers. So consider the world from the point of view of an integer. The integers are just the whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the negative ones, minus 1, and so on and so forth. All those, right? And suppose, as an integer, you can think about other integers, and you can think about addition, subtraction, and multiplication. Those are your resources that you have to think. So you can think about, 2 plus 2, 4, of course, and things like that. Now, whenever you apply the operations of addition, subtraction, and multiplication to integers, you'll always get another integer back. This means basically that the integers are closed under those operations. You'll always get one of those back when you apply it to two of them. So in some sense, you can think that the integers form a certain structure, an algebraic structure that's closed under these three operations. So from the point of view of an integer, it would seem natural to you that the integers is all there is, because what else could there be? The sum and multiplication, subtraction of any two integers, you always get another integer back, so nothing else, and these are your resources that you have to think about the world. Now this could be so, even though the numerical reality that the integers are part of is much richer. It might be that there is the rational numbers, meaning the integers and all the fractions, like 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, and so on and so forth. And the integers are just part of that. And between any two integers, there's infinitely many other numbers. Just the integers can never think about those because they only have integers to think about and multiplication, addition, and subtraction, which never gets you from integers to something else. But if the integers had division, then they could do, 1 divided by 2, suddenly you go from something that's an integer to something else. Right? So the integers you can think of are a substructure of all there is. It's a subalgebra of the rational numbers. They don't, if they had just another number to talk about, 1/2, they could go beyond what they have done before. They could reach 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, and the negative ones, and so on and so forth. If they had division, they could get everything. But they don't. They can only think about the integers. So the integers are a subalgebra of the rational numbers. From the point of view of the integers, it would seem like the integers is all there is, even though they are surrounded by all these other numbers, and it's just a thin part, a small part of all of reality, with infinitely many numbers between any two of them. And the subalgebra hypothesis, for our case, says that this could be our situation, that we are like the integers. Our representational system basically gives us a subalgebra of all the facts that obtain. That there are certain facts that are connected to each other with, say, explanatory relationships. This fact explains that fact. Or some other causal relationship, or various relationships between facts, such that the ones that we can represent just get us from facts we can represent to facts we can represent. Our representation system gives us an algebra. It's closed under these connections of facts that we have, but it might just be a subalgebra. It might be that there's all these facts that we just can't get to because the resources we have to represent connections between facts always get us back to facts we can already represent. Now, if this was true, then it would reconcile that on the one hand, we have good reason to believe there are ineffable facts, and on the other hand, that they're not to be found because we never encounter them. Whenever we ask for an explanation of a fact, then we go back to our subalgebra. Whenever we wonder what's going on over there, we are within our subalgebra because causal connections, let's say, are subsumed in it. But reality itself could be much, much richer. So suppose that was true. Suppose the subalgebra hypothesis is correct. What would follow? It would show first that the ineffable is irrelevant for ordinary inquiry. Because whenever you ask for, say, an explanation of certain fact, you are within your subalgebra. Right? It would not the ineffable would never show up for ordinary cases of inquiry. But there is one case where it would show up. And this is when you ask questions like we do in philosophy and metaphysics in particular, where we want to know what all of reality is like. We want to know what's the world like in its totality. Because now the worry is that what seems like the compelling answer to us, well, the world is just the material world in space and time, and maybe a little bit added or something like that to it. This seeming compelling to us might just reflect our representational limitation, that we would naturally take our subalgebra to be all of reality, just like the integers would naturally think, what else could there be? Of course, it's all integers. Even though that's completely false, it might seem compelling to them. And so this is a concern about the project of trying to find out what reality as a whole is like. I'll leave you with that.